Hello and welcome back to the Retro Perspective series that takes a look at each and every issue of the official PlayStation magazine. This time we have issue number 6 from May of 1996. In previous issues there was a lot of boasting, let's be quite frank, about how far ahead the PlayStation was compared to its main competitor at the time, Sega, with its Sega Saturn. Which brings us to the first news story of the magazine. In a move somewhere between immensely bold and incredibly stupid, Sega recently issued a statement claiming that sales of its 32-bit Saturn console have overtaken those of the PlayStation, and that Sega is now the UK's next-generation console market leader. Phil Harrison, Sony's communication director, says, "It's frankly laughable for Sega to claim market leadership in the UK on the strength of 1 week's sales. In order to clear up the situation and confirm our leadership position, we challenge Sega to an independent audit," continues Phil. "We propose that Sega and Sony cover half the cost each of a respected accountancy firm to examine our books and confirm our sales. Unfortunately, Sega declined. You can draw your own conclusions on what that means." In other news, Sony had just won a court case against German inventor Andreas Pavel over patent infringement of his 1977 design for a stereophonic reproduction system for personal wear. 51-year-old Pavel first took Sony to the patent court in 1990, claiming that its Walkman design infringed his original patent. The court settled in favour of Sony. So he then took them to the Court of Appeal. Had he won, he would have claimed a percentage of sales revenue from the device, which has sold some 150 million units worldwide. Unfortunately, however, the Court of Appeal upheld the earlier ruling and closed the case. And once again, now it's time for the feedback section where readers have sent in letters to PSM about all their gaming gripes.
Enemy now known. Issue 4 managed both to promote and put down the best game I have ever played on any format in one swoop. While the cover disc ran an enticing slideshow, the letters page may have unduly dissuaded potential buyers. The game is XCOM, Enemy Unknown, and the problem, or not as I see it, is use of a memory card. It is important that readers understand that the advertised and moaned about requirements for a full 15-space memory card is not necessary. I completed XCOM, okay, so it was on beginner level, and from start to finish used no more than 3 memory slots. Saving the game from the world screen and not from planet surfaces seems to be the trick. I hope this will redress the balance from issue 4. Strategy gamers will simply love the way the plot develops in this stunning, albeit not cutting edge, masterpiece. More please, Microprose. Alistair G. Donald, Fife.
Ah yes. Our copy of XCOM has actually used just 2 memory slots, and we're not far off finishing, so you would appear to be completely correct. Once again, and at the risk of getting really tedious, XCOM is still one of the most underrated games on the PlayStation. Its mix of strategic combat and global management sim makes it an addictive and enduring title, and the best news is, XCOM Terror from the Deep is being converted as we speak.
I disagree with your reply to the musical notes letter in PSM3, saying that there wouldn't be a big enough market for a music program similar to Pro Tracker or Octamed on the PlayStation. A lot of people have upgraded to the PlayStation from the Amiga. This is self-evident if you read the Sony conference pages featured on the internet. I've also noticed that a lot of feedback letters are asking for smaller programs and utilities to be featured on the demo CDs. Surely these useful programs can't be too hard for professional teams like Sony or Psygnosis to develop. I wouldn't buy a £2,000 PC if the PlayStation, which I believe has MIDI support, can offer me the same potential for recording music. I'm sure many others share the same views.
Well, for starters, the PlayStation is not directly MIDI compatible. You need to buy a MIDI interface. For seconds, it doesn't have a keyboard, so actually using the program would be a real pain. Thirdly, you have no way of saving your work. 128k flash RAM is not enough. And finally, it simply isn't worth the effort given the number of units that will be sold. especially when most MIDI packages eventually get given away free on Amiga or PC magazines. PlayStation is for video games. Now let's not hear another word on the matter. Well, we're only on issue 6 and already we've got another new feature. This one's Q&A, where readers can write in and just ask a series of questions. And I'm sure some of these you've been dying to know the answer to from all the way back in 1996.
Is Sony intending to upgrade the PS1 to 64-bit?
Nope, you can't upgrade the PlayStation to be 64-bit except by removing all of its innards and replacing them with more powerful ones.
Are there any plans for an add-on to play movies in the future on the PlayStation?
Oh, how many times? No, no, no. Don't you have a perfectly good VCR player at home already? I do.
What's with Psygnosis giving titles away to Sega like Wipeout and Destruction Derby? Does this mean we'll get loads of Sega games?
Sega has made no mention of converting its titles to PlayStation, though it would probably be a lot more damaging for Sega to have its top-selling titles on PlayStation than for Psygnosis to convert PlayStation titles to Saturn. After all, if you could get Virtua Fighter 2 and Sega Rally on PlayStation, no one would buy a Saturn, would they?
Can you tell me how to get past the first track in Ridge Racer?
Maybe don't hit anything?
What is the SCART lead, and what exactly does it do?
The SCART lead, also known as Euro Connector and Peritel, is used to connect the PlayStation to modern TVs, giving you a sharper picture.
Are there any technical specifications needed on the TV to support SCART?
Yes, it has to have a SCART socket. It's an oblong shape with 21 connectors inside.
Why do games like Doom, Worms and Crazy Ivan have double CD cases when they only come on one CD?
At the time, there was a shortage of the officially branded PlayStation cases, and so bog standard double CD cases were used instead.
So I've heard that the Saturn can be linked up to the PlayStation to play the Saturn games with the PlayStation's far superior capabilities. Where can I get the link cable?
What a load of utter drivel. Please find the person that told you that and hit them very hard in the nads. For the previews this month, PSM seem extremely excited first and foremost for Tekken 2. Many of the original characters have returned for another kick-in, and the gameplay structure is more or less intact, but Tekken 2 does offer real improvements over its predecessor. For starters, the graphics now feature real-time light sourcing in favour of garage shading. While this was used to impressive effect in Battle Arena Toshinden, many gamers argued that the Tekken characters looked gaudy and unrealistic, but what garage shading can do is effectively hide the edges of polygons, making limbs and bodies look more rounded. Light sourcing alters the colour saturation of polygon faces so that, for instance, the underside of a leg looks darker than the top. While this gives the characters a solidity previously unseen in beat-em-ups, they now look more angular than before, echoing the cubist pugilists in Sega's Virtua Fighter series. However, many of Tekken 2's stages really make the most of this special lighting, such as a spotlit wooded arena and the interior of King's Church, replete with stained glass window. As the fighters move around each stage, their limbs and bodies are shaded accordingly, and, of course, they all cast realistic shadows. Yes, extremely realistic shadows. Following in the wake of XCOM Enemy Unknown, Transport Tycoon is yet another of Microprose's best-selling PC titles, which offers the thinking gamer more tantalising fare than bruised shins and bloody noses. A whole imaginary world lies ahead as you embark on a quest that takes you across land and sea. Transport Tycoon isn't dissimilar to the PC original, with its bold colour and sumptuous detailing, and there's no shortage of animation. Locomotives puffing between stations, vehicles snaking in all directions, boats furrowing through the shipping channels. However, the PlayStation version does incorporate a second graphical perspective, not only to make use of the machine's much praised 3D capabilities, but also to give the game a more engrossing feel. Much as in the same way that Bullfrog's theme park allowed you to get an almost Doom-style view of things, Transport Tycoon allows you to zoom in and see exactly what web your wheeler dealing is weaving in the TT environment. This issue has even more love for the UK game industry, and it seems Sheffield was a big player at the time, with Gremlin Interactive, who were working on a slew of games here in the previews, including Slipstream, a futuristic hovermungus racing game which made its debut a year ago on the PC. Sister magazine PC Gamer was moved to describe it as simple, quick and fun. It's exactly the kind of game that we need more of on the PC. Whether it's the kind of game we need more of is debatable. There's also Reloaded, the sequel to one of PlayStation's first releases, Loaded, a viewed from above shoot 'em up with some glorious visuals, but there isn't much else to do apart from blast away. Reloaded is taking the criticisms of the original by the scruff of the neck and shaking them free. Gone are the linear levels, in come grouped levels where you can wander between 3 sections. Pat Falan says, "We want to involve a lot more variety and lateral thinking. One of the problems was that occasionally your character disappeared behind a wall, so we've designed a mechanism to tilt the screen, and we're even going to add some Street Fighter style moves where you have to waggle your joystick to pull them off." One thing I've mentioned previously is that around this time, sports games were absolutely massive. It seemed like a new sports game was coming out pretty much every week. And in this magazine in particular, this issue, we have tons of previews and tons of reviews of all sorts of different sports games that I've never played and I probably wouldn't have much interest in. That's not to say that I'm going to just skip over every sports game in these magazines, but for now, with this issue in particular, what I really want to get onto and what I think you'll find far more interesting is its main feature. To many people, the name Sony means TVs, videos, and the PlayStation, but the second biggest electronics company in the world is much more than just a black box manufacturer. On the 50th anniversary of its foundation, PSM looks at the company, its history, and its future. The Sony name is as weighty and respectable as any brand in the world. It resonates with reassuring tones of reliability and the promise of innovation, yet remains persistently stylish. The word itself, however, means nothing whatsoever in any language. When the company was founded by Akio Morita and Masaru Ibuka 50 years ago, it was called Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo, or Tokyo Telecommunications Engineering Company. But it wasn't long before the firm's directors realised the name was something of a mouthful, and decidedly unsuitable as a brand. They attempted to change it to Tokyo Teletech before discovering a US company already using Teletech. Their next prince-like attempt was to use just a symbol, an inverted pyramid with small wedges cut out of the sides, to give a stylised T within a thin circle border. It didn't work. Ibuka and Morita wanted a short, memorable word that would act as the name and a brand for their company, one that could be recognised and pronounced all over the world. At the time, they were operating solely in the audio business, and so hit upon sonus, the Latin word for sound, as a starting point. Then, as now, English and American slang was popular in Japan, if often slightly misunderstood, and Morita and his research team often referred to themselves as the Sunny Boys, 50s speak for top geezers. But the word sunny was no good, as it would have been pronounced as son-ni, a Japanese word meaning to lose money. Morita hit upon a simple solution: drop an N and the word became Sony, meaning and implying nothing to anyone in the world, and first appeared on a transistor radio in 1955. For a while it acted purely as a brand, with the company continuing to trade as Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo. Soon, however, the brand became the company, the name change being made official in January of 1958. Morita and Ibuka had met in a military research group developing heat-seeking technology in 1943. Morita as a Navy officer, Ibuka as a seconded civilian and director of a leading engineering company. Once the group's work was done, they went their separate ways, but later their paths crossed once more. Morita took a teaching post at a Tokyo college, and soon after his arrival in the city he discovered that Ibuka had left the instrument company to set up his own business, Tokyo Telecommunications Research, in the bombed-out shell of what was once one of the country's top department stores. TTR had 7 employees and no real plan of action. It was simply an ideas factory. Amongst the early suggestions for a first project were a chain of miniature golf courses, made possible by Tokyo being virtually flattened by bombing, a snack food line, and a low-cost rice cooker. None ever made it to market. Eventually, Ibuka gave the go-ahead to a shortwave adapter to be bolted onto existing AM radios, enabling them to pick up international broadcasts, which had been banned during the war. It proved a modest success, and Ibuka's Tokyo Telecommunications Research was up and running. Morita monitored the progress of his old comrade's company closely, and within a year he joined the team, working in close proximity on the production and improvement of the shortwave adapters. The two men became great friends, finding that they inspired each other. They decided they needed their own joint venture as an outlet for their dynamism. What was later to become Sony was founded with 20 employees and an initial capitalization of just $500. Its first project was the production of new motors and pickups for old phonographs, leaving the bigger companies to concentrate on creating new models. As with Ibuka's shortwave add-on, the neat sideline proved a profitable business, creating the opportunity for expansion. Next to hit the market was a mixing unit for radio stations. It was while delivering an order to NHK, a new station controlled by occupation forces, that Ibuka had seen a Wilcox-Gay tape recorder, which to him seemed like it had been beamed straight down from the planet Blimey. He and Morita immediately set out designing their own tape recorder, but a post-war scarcity of industrial materials made the challenge nigh impossible. The first tapes used in prototypes were actually just quarter-inch strips of paper, hand-coated with magnetic material. Morita and Ibuka were building quite a reputation in Japan as innovators in the field of consumer electronics. In the rest of the world, however, it was generally assumed that all Japanese companies lagged a good few years behind their American counterparts. Sony was even reprimanded by the US Customs Office in the late 50s for printing the words "Made in Japan" too small on one product. The company was trying to hide its roots. Japan, Morita opined, was associated with paper umbrellas, kimonos, toys and trinkets. Then, as now however, 6% of all Sony's sales were ploughed back into R&D, fueling more and more technological breakthroughs and gradually changing the whole world's view of Sony and Japan. The company produced the world's first transistorized TV in 1959, which had a big enough impact in the US for Ibuka and Morita to create Sony Corporation of America in 1960. The new division quickly became aware of the work of Ampex, a US firm that provided technically impressive but incredibly cumbersome videotape recorders for use in the broadcast industry. Ibuka and Morita immediately saw the potential for a home model. Once again, the key was miniaturization. And that of course laid the groundwork for the Walkman, one of the most successful consumer electronics products ever launched. It has in fact transcended the tag of mere product and achieved genuine icon status. More than 100 million Sony Walkmans have been sold since the product was introduced in 1979. So what about the PlayStation then? The story of PlayStation goes right back to the 70s, a period when Sony was conducting a lot of research into digital manipulation. The result was System G, something that sounds like a particularly bad jazz fusion band, but is in fact a real-time 3D special effects tool for the broadcast industry, and a rather good one at that. It meant that with System G online, TV stations could have whizzy graphics on live output as well as recorded material. Quite a few of the members of the System G team were interested in the new phenomenon of video games, which at the time meant a few blobs trying to shoot, hit or avoid other slightly different shaped blobs. One of the team, Ken Kutaragi, saw vague connections between the primitive charms of Space Invaders and the high-tech work he and his colleagues had put into System G's image manipulation. In both cases, The synthesis and manipulation of digital images was the key. Throughout the 80s, Kutaragi remained keenly interested in the development of video game technology, and towards the end of the decade, started work on a games machine utilising his knowledge and experience in the special effects field. In 1990, Nintendo expressed an interest in adding a CD peripheral to its 16-bit SNES. Sony showed them Kutaragi's work in progress, and Nintendo liked what it saw. The two firms agreed that Nintendo would brand and sell the CD unit as an add-on for the SNES, while Sony would brand and sell an all-in-one cart and CD playing machine to be known as the PlayStation. At the last minute, amid utter confusion and a blizzard of rumour, the deal collapsed. Neither side ever explained the split. One theory is that Nintendo agreed that while it would continue to control and earn from the licensing of cartridge and CD games, Sony would handle all non-game products, and it was only after the deal was signed that Nintendo realised what a massive market it might have given away. Movies, audio, music video, education, reference, etc. So it reneged on the deal. It's just a theory, but whatever the truth, Kutaragi was delighted with the split. Sony knew it had a winner in terms of technology, but still had to fight the business battle, and so it gave a demo of the PlayStation to Japan's top software publishers. They were impressed but not convinced. Nintendo controlled the Japanese market with a 97% share. It also controlled third-party publishers with rigid licenses, and no publisher wanted to risk alienating the firm by being seen to side with another manufacturer. So Sony baited its hook. It promised publishers that it would sell 1 million PlayStations in Japan within the first year. It also offered a hugely improved business model. Sony would sell third parties completed discs and boxes for around 1/3 of what Nintendo was charging for a cartridge, opening the way for lower retail prices, higher margins, or a bit of both. PlayStation was launched in Japan on December 3rd, and Sony indeed sold 100,000 units on day one. It had sold 300,000 by the end of December and 1 million by May 27th. On to the reviews now, and it seemed like it had been a bit of a slow month in May for the PlayStation because there's a lot of sports games here again. But we're starting off with Ridge Racer Revolution, which I actually have fond memories of. It's one of the first PlayStation games that I played. Namco's follow-up to its original racing sim has a decent stab at creating something different, but is it really worth the second trip? As you may know, the original Ridge Racer had only one track. The main edition for Ridge Racer Revolution is another track, and the ability to play multiplayer with link-up cable. Revolution is a lot tougher than before, due to the annoyingly twisty-turny nature of the course and the more aggressive drivers. Make no mistake, this new track is a swine, full of sharp bends, narrow lanes, and unforgiving chicanes. There are precious few straights where you can let rip, and even then you only get a brief moment of full-on acceleration before you have to slam on the anchors again to make the next corner. So is it crap then? Well, this is where it gets tricky. You see, Revolution is undoubtedly a poor sequel. The only real innovation is the link-up mode, which we're loath to praise too highly because 1, it should have bloody well been in Ridge Racer, and 2, it's an expensive and inconvenient way of going head to head. Despite the complaints, PSM gave it a pretty amazing 8 out of 10, only 1 point below the original Ridge Racer, even though I guess technically this is factually better than that game, being pretty much the same but just with 1 extra track added. On the next page, we have more gushing about player animations in the newest football game to hit the shelves, Adidas Power Soccer from Sony France. We've seen a lot of talk about the innovations of animation in the previous issues. PSM says you only have to watch the rendered introduction to APS to understand the loving care that has been lavished on this game. The movement of the rendered players is remarkably fluid as they juggle the ball from toe to knee and then onto head before unleashing a howitzer into the net. Of course, the game itself doesn't look this good, but how long before games will? There are 2 ways to play, simulation and arcade. The former, though incorporating some special moves, is a more faithful reproduction of football, but it's in the latter option where APS really excels, simply because there isn't anything else quite like it. Adidas Power Soccer is a wild, entertaining arcade soccer game. Purists may recoil in horror at some of the special moves, but we enjoy kicking people in the head. 8 out of 10. On the next page is a review for Hebereke's Popoito, which is pretty much a Puyo Puyo clone, or if you've played games like Dr. Mario, you'll know pretty much what this game is. And stuff like this just kind of makes me even more annoyed that we never got games like Police Noughts in the UK, yet we got this. I don't think anyone was asking for it really. £40 is a hefty whack of moolah for a simple puzzle game, and the cost of console puzzlers has always been a bone of contention, especially when you can get shareware clones on the PC and Amiga for little more than the price of a floppy disk, says PSM. They give it 6 out of 10. Well, here's one that was clearly completely rushed through development. Resurrection: Rise of the Robots 2. It was only a few issues ago that they reviewed the first one. The moment of truth arrives. Rise of the Robots ascends from the ashes of ridicule in a blaze of fireballs, projectiles, and thumping sound effects. But has this resurrection been worth the wait? Not much of a wait, really. Developer Mirage has neither captured nor rivaled the panache of its predecessors. Resurrection just doesn't have that certain absorbing something. It's a particularly unfeeling game with a distinct lack of personality and is devoid of excitement or grace. It gets a 4 out of 10 from PSM. And of course we couldn't go a month without a cheesy FMV game. This one's Psychic Detective, which gets a 5 out of 10. How the game works. The film has been shot through the eyes of each protagonist, which opens up a profusion of routes for the plot to travel. During the proceedings, faces of characters relevant to that scene appear in small circular form upon the screen, and if you pat the button, you get to view the proceedings in their shoes. Other icons present themselves too, like cats, bracelets, necklaces, knives and keychains. Tap on these and short, bizarre film sequences unfold, often exceptionally weird and usually dreadfully gory. Next up, Revolution X, which gets a 2 out of 10. And I didn't know this, but apparently Aerosmith feature in this game in some way. I don't know what they'd be doing in this, but yeah, apparently they're in it. Revolution X is a shoot 'em up with bugger all plot. Sadly though, you can't shoot the band. Based on the #1 arcade smash, where Namibia, Revolution X is a Lethal Enforcer clone. You can be very blasé when playing Revolution X. It requires so little skill that all you really need are quick responses. In 2-player mode we managed to wade through to the last but one stage in a single sitting. However, it's frustrating when trying to target moving objects, as the joypad simply doesn't lend itself to this style of game. The motions aren't snappy or precise enough, leaving you battling with the control system as opposed to the enemy. Well, I think for once I may have actually stumbled across a PlayStation game that I don't even want to play. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I've been Jake of the Retro Perspective. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.